Good day, my listeners. Today's episode is for the intuitive people. It is for you. It is the fifth episode of Understanding Our Social World, and it is a special episode. It is about the echoes of the mind that have interacted deeply with our environment. They are echoes, thoughts, stories unique to this podcast alone, and you can't find them anywhere else. In this episode, we have 5 echoes, 5 thoughts, 5 stories that we will be discussing. Ladies and gentlemen, listening to me on this special episode, I welcome you to this episode of our podcast titled The Echoes. The story of understanding our social world can't be complete without you. You've been showing up, listening to every episode of our podcast, and even sharing them to those on your space. I don't take all this for granted, and if you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button now. And for those just joining us, listening to Understanding Our Social World for the first time, I'm assuring you that you are in the right place, and you won't want to miss any unit of thoughts in this special edition of our podcast. You should also hit the subscribe button and catch up with our previous episode. I remain your host, Khalid Alawadi, and I will be walking you through the echoes in this podcast. The first echo in this special edition of our episode is about validation, and it reads, though true authenticity seeks freedom from external validation, the human self is inevitably shaped by the recognition of others. To resist the tide requires inner strength, but even the strongest cannot fully escape the power of communal validation. Thus, the balance between self-determination and the influence of society defines the struggle for authentic existence. The genesis of this echo is with regards to my deep thoughts about why people keep preaching against external validation. For me, external validation, or let's say validation seeking, is about what makes us human. Like, to be human is to seek validation, and it doesn't matter how overt or covert they are. And I am going to explain how I got there. There is this popular statement I do tell myself often: I don't care what people think about me. Yeah, I used to say that. And probably you've told yourself that too. Or maybe you might have listened or you might have heard someone say, I just do me, I don't live for anyone else. All these statements sound so powerful and seems to tell how fascinating the one making this statement is. But then, do you just do you? Or don't I really care about what people think about me? I mean, let's think about it. From the moment we are born, we start shaping who we are based on people around us. Parents, teachers, friends, society, they all leave fingerprints on our identity. Even the person who says, I don't care what anyone thinks, is in some way reacting to the world's expectation. This is when I realized that one of the lies we tell ourselves that makes us feel good about ourselves revolves around not caring. We love the idea of being independent, of standing on our own, of being unapologetically ourselves. But deep down, we all want to be seen. We all want to be valued. And that is not a weakness at all. It is just being human. If you post something on social media and no one reacts, no comments, no likes, does it affect you? Even if it is just a little. Yeah, for me it does. Like, it means a lot. It means my audience for that particular post are not part of my over 4,000 followers on Facebook. Or basically, my post is of no interest to them. Or probably the way I structured my message isn't clear to them. I will have to work on that for my subsequent posts. And yeah, what just happened? I just responded to a situation that somewhat invalidates the intent of my post. Now let me bring a deeper example. Imagine you decide to quit your job today and chase your dream of becoming a musician. If the people close to you tells you, that's stupid, you will never make it as a musician, will you start doubting yourself? Definitely at that moment you will, even though you might fight it as soon as you start to get over it. And that is the thing. Like, we don't exist in a vacuum. No matter how much we want to believe we are self-made, we are always shaped by the people around us. We all want to be around a community of people that validate some of the things we do, either through their acceptance or rejection. For example, when I wanted to start this podcast, I had to consult people, seek their validation and the reasons behind their validation. Then I worked with what seems to work with me, you understand? I choose what seems to work with me and work with them. We all must be part of a community, be it faith-based organization, social justice group, or even peer groups that validate some of the things we do. And the crazy part of this is that sometimes we think we are making these choices ourselves, but in reality, we are just responding to outside pressures in ways we don't even realize. You might have met the type who says, I don't follow rules, I don't fit into society's box. But guess what? Even that rebellion is shaped by the society. If you define yourself as the opposite of what is normal, you are still letting the norm dictate who you are, just in reverse. It's like the kid who grew up in a strict household and then becomes wild the moment they get freedom. Are they really making independent choices, or are they just reacting to the cage they were put into? So, if that is the case, what does it mean to be authentic? Being authentic is not about rejecting validation in totality. It is about being intentional, about choosing who we get validated from, how we get validated, and who deserve to validate us, or who do we get validation from. It isn't about completely ignoring what people think. That is completely impossible. It's about being aware of those influences and choosing what truly aligns to who you are. Okay, here's an example. Let's say you love arts, but your family wants you to become a doctor. If you become a doctor just to please them, then know that you are just living their version of you, not your own. But if you reject medicine just to prove them wrong, are you really being authentic? Or are you just letting their expectation control you in the opposite direction? Or let me use my being a Muslim as another example. As a Muslim, you don't expect me to just go online, go social media, to start seeking validation and to start getting access, you understand? With regards to issues of my faith, my religion, and my way of life, I know who and how I get validated. So true authenticity isn't just doing the opposite of what people expect. It is about pausing and asking yourself, what do I want? What feels true to me, to my ideals, to my faith? But the hardest part is that even if you know who you are, can you really undo the loneliness that comes with it? Because to be honest with you, and to be honest with myself, being totally yourself means that some people won't approve you. You might lose friends, you might disappoint families, and that is where a lot of people fold. They start adjusting themselves, shrinking their real self to just fit in. But it is good for us to remember that every great person in history, the artists, the thinkers, the revolutionaries, stood in the discomfort of being different. So the question is, can you undo that discomfort? Like, can you undo the discomfort of being alone? Here is what I want to take from this section of this podcast. You can't escape society's influence entirely, but you can learn to recognize it. The key to authenticity isn't pretending the world doesn't affect you. It is knowing when you are being pulled in a direction that doesn't align with your true self. It is not about rejecting validation or worshipping validation. It is about being intentional about the variables involved in your validation process. The second echo is about capitalism and Marxism, and just for you to know, I don't sympathize with any of them. Last year in our 3 level days, we took some courses on these concepts, and interestingly, though not surprising, it's divided the class into like two major camps, those for capitalism and those for Marxism. And it is always fun seeing a camp countering the argument of the other, and it was really, really fun, and it's made us learn a lot. So I participated in the intellectual struggle between the two camps, but as a different party. Today I criticize Marxism. Tomorrow, capitalism tastes the sharpness of my intellectual sword. At one point, some of my brothers were like, wait, Khalid, where do I really belong? Like, where do you belong? But only a few people knows the answers to that. But then, aside from doing those things because of the ideas I believe in, because of my ideals, I wanted to make people to understand that while the color white and black are at the extreme ends of the color spectrum, there are uncountable numbers of colors in between. We have this habit of seeing the world in extremes. If you criticize capitalism, people assume you must be a Marxist. If you reject Marxism, people think you are defending capitalism. But what if I told you that both of these ideas are just 2 points on a more bigger spectrum? Let's start with this simple question. What does it actually mean to be a capitalist? A lot of people assume that money making equals capitalism. But is that really true? Imagine you are a street vendor selling homemade food and you are making enough money to live comfortably and maybe even expanding your businesses. Does that automatically make you a capitalist? Now compare that to a multinational corporation that cuts wages, exploits cheap labor, and lobbies government just to maximize their profits. Same profit motive, but a different relationship to capitalism. So the real question isn't do you seek profit, but rather how far are you willing to go for profit? That is where the real ethos of capitalism comes into play. It is not just about making money, it is about the lanes people will go in order to maximize it. Would you exploit workers if it meant higher returns? Would you prioritize stakeholders' profits over the well-being of employees? Would you destroy life if it meant increasing your company's value? At some point, the pursuit of profit stops being just about making living and becomes an ideology that is a way of seeing the world where everything, even human dignity, has a price tag. Like I said earlier, whenever we discuss capitalism, someone always brings up Marxism as if those are the only two choices we have. If you critique capitalism, you must be Marxism. If you reject Marxism, you must love only capitalism. But that's really, really wrong. It is wild how often we forget that these two systems, Marxism and capitalism, are just theories created in a certain period of history. They are not the only ways to organize human life. There were worlds before them, and there will be worlds beyond them. Think about it. Asian societies function without capitalism or Marxism. Indigenous economies like various systems in Africa were often based on community reciprocity, not market competition. And even medieval guilds had systems of production and trade that didn't fit nearly into capitalism or Marxist categories. But today, it's like we put on the blinders. We act like capitalism is natural when Marxism is the only alternative we have. But why? What if there is more? There is definitely more. If capitalism rewards profit maximization at any cost, and Marxism focuses on eliminating profit ownership for collective benefits, they're not about the spaces in between. What about hybrid systems that mix market dynamics with ethical constraints? What about economies that prioritize well-being over endless growth? We don't have to pick between two extremes. Maybe it is time we start asking tough questions or start asking deeper questions. What kind of world do we actually want to build? We all love innovation, but how can we balance it with fairness? Can we design economies that work for people, not just profits? An economic system that had worked remarkably well in the past, why were they successful? Finally, rejecting capitalism doesn't mean embracing Marxism, and rejecting Marxism doesn't mean endorsing capitalism. There is a whole universe of human possibilities beyond these narrow labels. Okay, alright. In this third segment of our episode, let's talk about democracy. The system, we are told, puts power in the hands of the people. The system that is defined as the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That is for the interest of the people. But then I've always asked, in democracy, who defines the interest of the people? Maybe that will be explored by a guest in subsequent episode. And here's another question. Do the people actually govern? Or does democracy just give the illusion of shared power while a small group makes real decisions? Before I move on, let me echo out the echo that brought about this book on democracy as it is popularly perceived. Democracy paradoxically rests on the relationship between the irresponsibility of the many and the burden of responsibility borne by the few. Rarely in human history has the collective demonstrated consistent responsibility. Instead, it is the structural inevitability of the many's abdication that compels the few to act with deliberate intentionality. The progress of any democratic society does emerge not from universal accountability, but from the tension wherein the irresponsibility of the majority demands the informed and decisive action of the minority. Now, let me break this down. Democracy is supposed to mean the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But to be honest, let's be honest to ourselves, how engaged are most people in shaping political decisions? Thinking about voter turnout in democratic countries, half or more than eligible voters don't even show up on election day. And even among those who do, how many are actually informed about policies, governance, and long-term consequences? How many people read bills, follow economic policies, or deeply analyze foreign affairs? The reality is that most people don't engage with democracy beyond just casting votes, and even that is often based on emotion, media influence, and probably group identity rather than deep understanding of the things at stake. So what happens? The responsibility of decision making naturally shifts to a smaller group. Bureaucrats, politicians, corporate leaders, think tanks, business moguls. Whether we admit it or not, they are the ones making the real choices while the majority moves passively within the system. Or this isn't necessarily laziness or apathy. It is based on how society is structured. Most people are busy surviving, working, raising families, handling personal struggles. The complexity of governance is so overwhelming, and democracy doesn't give people the time, education, and incentives to deeply engage. So what happens? People abdicate responsibility and the few step in. History has proved this over time, from the ancient Athens to modern nation states. The many have really taken sustained responsibility for governance. They engage in short-term bursts like protests, elections, and even revolutions like the Arab Spring and the likes. And in the long run, governance always consolidates into the hands of few. This is not necessarily a conspiracy. It is just how systems evolve. The few have to take control, because if they don't, everything falls apart. Here comes another question. Is democracy really about universal accountability? Democracy isn't about universal accountability. It is about the constant tension between the constant tension between the irresponsibility of the many and the burden of responsibility borne by few. The system progresses not because everyone is informed and active, but because the pressure of the masses forces an informed minority to act. History has always been like that. Take civil movement rights happen because a few people organize, strategize, and push forward change, while the majority remain passive or resistant. Technological and economic shifts come from the concentrated effort of innovators and policymakers, not from the broad public. Even revolutions, though they appear collective, are typically driven by a core group that takes on the real responsibility of vision, organization, and execution. So what does this mean for us? If democracy is built on this paradox, then we have to ask, are we okay with this structure, Or maybe, should we be demanding more active engagement from the majority? If power naturally consolidates in the hands of few, how do we ensure they act in the interest of many? Is the problem with democracy itself or with how we've been conditioned to engage with it? However, it isn't that democracy is flawed, but that we assume it works differently than it actually does. If you look around the world today, it seems like science, technology, engineering, mathematics on the world. Tech companies shape how we communicate, artificial intelligence is changing how we work, and medical breakthroughs are extending our lives. Governments and businesses pour billions into STEM education, and students are told that if they want a real future, they need to study tech, engineering, or medicine and the likes. But to be honest, it shouldn't be like that. The world can't work like that. Technology alone doesn't determine the course of society. The deciding powers lies in the hands of those who understand how to shape human behavior, influence culture, and set the rules of the game. And that's exactly where the social sciences come in. I echoed that the perceived supremacy of STEM in shaping our world is either the result of a deliberate overstatement by certain individuals or the apathy of most social science students, save a few, who fail to assert the decisive potency of their discipline. While it appears that technological advancement grant control to those who wield them, the bigger truth lies in their mastery over social agency through mechanisms that include but transcend technology. So, true societal sovereignty requires a deliberate reinvestment into social sciences, not as imitators of foreign ideals, but as creators of our own. What do I mean? At first glance, it seems obvious that whoever controls technology controls the world. Tech companies shape election, AI decides who gets hired, data scientists influence what we see online. But what we refuse to see is that technology itself is neutral. It depends entirely on who controls it and how it is used. Think about how a government can use AI for mass surveillance or for improving public services. How social media can be a tool for political manipulation or a platform for social change. How scientific breakthroughs can lead to weapons of destruction or cures for diseases. This all points to the fact that the real power isn't in the technology. It is in decision making, laws, and values that determine why it is being created and how it is being used. Who shapes those? People trained in philosophy, mass communication, political science, psychology, economics, history, aka the social sciences. The biggest misconception people have is that social sciences are just sub-subjects that can't change the world the way STEM does. But look around you, flip the pages of your history books. You will see that every empire, every revolution, every world-changing idea has come from the mastery of human systems, not just machines. Thinking of some of the greatest history turning points, colonialism wasn't just about ships or guns. It was about economic models, cultural hegemony, and legal structures that kept nations in control for centuries. The civil rights movement wasn't about new technology. It was about strategic organization, social philosophy, and psychological resistance. Even the internet itself didn't shape society alone. It was about social media algorithms, political narratives, and economic structures that turned it into a tool for influence and power. So technology isn't just the tool, the rules of the game, who benefits, who suffers, who thrives, and who is silenced are determined by social force. So technology is just a tool. The rules of the game, who benefits, who suffers, who thrives, and who is silenced are determined by social forces. There are two possible explanations for the perceived importance of STEM over social sciences, like I said in the echo. The first has to do with a deliberate overstatement. Maybe certain individuals, industries, governments push the idea that STEM is the most important force to consolidate influence and control. After all, if you convince society that technology alone runs the world, you shift attention away from who is actually setting the rules. Second is the failure of social sciences to assert their power. Maybe the problem isn't that STEM is overstated, but that too many in the social sciences have been passive. Why tech leaders dominate conversations about the future? How many sociologists, political scientists, philosophers are actively shaping this conversation? If we truly want to settle sovereignty in our African societies, we need to stop seeing social sciences as an afterthought. We need to invest in them, not as mere commentators on technology, but as architects of society's future. And this doesn't mean rejecting STEM, it means striking the balance. Because if we let technology be shaped without social vision, it becomes a weapon of control. But if we guide it with deep understanding of human agency, it becomes an instrument of liberation within the context of our own values. This last segment of our special episode of our podcast has to do with a highly controversial issue. A few weeks ago, I entered an office and they were discussing feminism. Somehow I got involved in the discussion, and as it is my custom, I asked a few questions so that I can sample their opinion on feminism. So I asked, if on my way to work, I noticed that some female kids are not being taken to school because they are female, if I begin advocating for them, does that make me feminist? He said yes. Okay. What if I find myself in a community where women are not allowed to inherit? In fact, they are inherited, and I decide to advocate for them. Does that make me feminist also? They affirmed the positive nod. Yes. I was wowed. There, I knew something is wrong. These are struggles that we championed long before the word or label feminism was constructed. And a lot of those who championed women's rights did that because of the ideals they believe in, not because of the feminist ideals. To be honest with my listeners, I will contextualize this further. My disagreement stems from the fact that about 1,400 years ago, a being did champion the rights of women, not because of feminist ideals, but because he was a Muslim. A prophet which we Muslims believed was assigned to change the world with regards to its political, sociocultural, and economical, as well as other aspects of human endeavors. He was raised in a society where, by and large, women were seen as things towards social status. Women, they were part of the properties inherited. Their education was seen as needless. And this man came, challenged these structures to the extent that even with a statement saying, educate a male, educate a person, educate a female, educate a nation. So he did all this because he is a Muslim, right? And not because of any feminist idea. That is to say, if a feminist comes to me, telling me to do things that goes against the ethos of my being a Muslim, I would definitely reject them because my standing for women's rights isn't because I believe in feminist ideals, but because I'm guided by Islamic principles. Same also applies to other communities like Sparta, for example. The women of Sparta were so educated and politically influential, not because of an ideal called feminism, but because their society valued strong women. So thinking about the whole discussion that day, it's become obviously unjust to me to reduce the historical struggles of women's rights. Ancient societies that thrived with women taking the lead with the label of feminism. Feminism should be used to label struggles unique to its values, its time, as well as its philosophy. As a result of this, I echoed this, which reads, to a self-acclaimed feminist, abandon the delusion that all forms of advocacy for the oppressed female sex fall under the banner of feminism. Many of the struggles you champion today predate the construction of the modern theme and philosophy of feminism itself. It is a historical fallacy to impose a contemporary framework on phenomena that existed long before its articulation. If feminists are to retain intellectual coherence, they must define feminism as a distinctly modern phenomenon, addressing issues and arguments unique to its era with a philosophy that stands apart. Otherwise, fidelity to history demands that we acknowledge and reference the antecedent struggles upon which it stands. The first issue is the false assumption that feminism is a default label for any and all struggles that involve empowerment of women. This is intellectually dishonest and historically inaccurate. The simple truth is that women have fought for themselves, have built civilization, and have shaped societies long before the word feminism was ever conceived. If feminism is going to have any meaningful definition, it must be seen as modern phenomenon, distinct in its approach, its ideology, and its concerns. Otherwise, it becomes so vague that it loses all intellectual integrity. It is also an historical injustice to impose a modern ideological framework on struggles that existed independent of it. Imagine if you are calling every past attempt at governance democracy just because it involved leadership. That would be so ridiculous because leadership structures have existed across cultures in different forms: monarchies, tribal councils, empires, all of which functioned without any connection to democratic ideals. So why do you have to do with feminism? Why do we take societies that empowered women for their own cultural, political, and religious reasons and call it feminism, as if those societies are simply waiting for the feminist label to validate their progress? By forcing every woman's struggle into a feminist narrative, we are stripping away the true ideological roots of these movements and replacing them with something foreign to their time. I have given the example of women of Sparta who were educated and wielded political influence, not because of feminism, but because Spartan society valued capable, strong women as necessary for the survival of the state. Queen Amina of Zazzau of the 16th century present-day Nigeria led her armies into battle, expanded her kingdom, and ruled with absolute authority. She did not need feminism to justify her power. The Iroquois Confederacy had a matriarchal system where women controlled property, governance, and world decisions, centuries before feminism was ever thought of. And Islamic reforms 1400 years ago gave women rights to inheritance, education, and legal identity, not because of feminism, but because of an entirely different worldview that saw these rights as divine, not as concessions from a patriarchal system. So tell me, why are these struggles being absorbed into feminism's narrative by some of the so-called feminists? Feminism did not create these movements. It did not inspire this civilization. It's a modern movement that should be judged by its own contribution, not by falsely claiming historical victories of the ideas that existed before it. And if feminism was to maintain intellectual coherence, it must define itself within its own era, within the specific philosophical and political framework it was introduced. Feminism shouldn't be a default term for all struggles of women. Feminism is not the origin of every woman's right for dignity. Feminism is a specific ideological movement that should be judged by its own merits. Otherwise, it becomes a historical parasite, feeding off the victories of women who had no connection to its philosophy. Finally, if we truly respect history, we must respect the independent struggles of women across cultures without forcing them under a feminist banner. We must let Sparta be Sparta, let Islam be Islam, let indigenous governance be itself, without pretending that they were all leading up to the modern feminist thoughts. So this brings us to the conclusion of our first edition of our special episode of our podcast titled The Echoes. This is also the 5th episode of our podcast. I have talked about validation, economy, democracy, STEM, and feminism. There is a high probability that I have shaken your table, but whatever thought is itching your mind or any lingering question, you can drop them in the comment section, or you reach out to us on our Facebook and LinkedIn handle at Understanding Asher World Podcast. If you also want to feature on our podcast to talk about issues affecting our social world, also reach out to us on our social handles. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscription button and follow us on our WhatsApp channel for instant updates via the link in the description. Understanding our social world is beyond the podcast. It is a platform, a movement, a story that is here to stay, to challenge us to deconstruct, construct, and reconstruct our social reality through original thinking and dialectic. See you in our next episode. I remain your host, Khalid Alawadi, signing off.